Remember just being a tourist in Australia and going past this.
For nearly 2 decades, the world has watched Robert Irwin grow up under the immense shadow of his legendary father, Steve Irwin. From the moment he could walk, Robert was surrounded by cameras, wildlife, and a global audience that expected him to someday step into the crocodile hunter's shoes. But no one, not even his mother, Terri Irwin, could have predicted the transformation he recently revealed. And when Terri finally saw what her son had become, she broke down in tears in front of millions. This emotional moment didn't happen in the Australia Zoo or on one of Robert's wildlife expeditions. It happened on a stage where the spotlight was far brighter and the pressure even heavier. Robert unveiled a version of himself that the world had never seen before, a mature, grounded young man who wasn't just carrying his father's legacy, but reshaping it in his own extraordinary way. And as he stood there, speaking from the heart about the journey he's traveled since childhood, Terri realized something she had never fully allowed herself to consider. Her little boy was no longer a boy at all. Every sacrifice she made after Steve's tragic passing, every moment she pushed through heartbreak to give her children a sense of normalcy, every late night trying to keep their family and their mission alive, it all came rushing back as she watched Robert's transformation unfold before her eyes. This wasn't just a performance. It was a tribute, one filled with gratitude, strength, and the unmistakable love of a son who finally understood everything his mother had carried alone. And that was the moment Terri Irwin couldn't hold back her tears. For most of his life, Robert Irwin has been seen as the energetic, ever-smiling boy who reminded millions of his late father, Steve Irwin, with the same bright enthusiasm, the same curiosity for wildlife, and that unmistakable Irwin grin. Robert carried a familiar warmth wherever he went. But behind that comfortable image was a quiet truth that only his closest family understood. Robert was growing up fast, and the world he inherited required him to grow even faster. Terri Irwin always knew this day would come. She had felt the shift slowly, in small moments that passed almost unnoticed. The way Robert spoke with more confidence during interviews, the way he made decisions at the Australia Zoo without hesitating, the way he protected his family's legacy with a seriousness far beyond his age. But nothing prepared her for what she witnessed on the night her son revealed his most striking transformation. The stage lights dimmed, and the audience fell silent. Terri sat in the front row, hands clasped together, her heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't nervous for the performance. She had always trusted Robert. She was nervous because she sensed he was about to show a part of himself he had kept hidden for a very long time. When Robert stepped into the spotlight, the room shifted. Gone was the cheerful boy the world knew. Standing before her was a composed young man, strong, confident, and heartbreakingly vulnerable all at once. For a moment, Terri couldn't breathe. As the music began, Robert didn't just perform. He opened a window into his soul, into memories he had rarely spoken about, and into emotions he had carried with quiet strength since he was a child. His movements told a story of loss, love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. Terri watched every second through eyes that were already beginning to fill. The images of the past rushed through her mind, Steve holding a tiny 2-year-old Robert, her own trembling hands wiping tears from her children's cheeks the night they lost their father. The endless days of rebuilding a life none of them were prepared for. And now, in a moment that felt almost unreal, Robert was showing the world what she had always seen in him: courage, kindness, and a depth that most people never truly knew. His transformation wasn't physical. It was spiritual, emotional, a turning point that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. When the performance ended, the audience erupted in applause. But Terri didn't hear any of it. She saw only her son, standing with tears in his eyes, looking directly at her as if to say, "Thank you for everything." She rose from her seat before she even realized she was moving. By the time she reached the stage, her tears were no longer held back. Robert stepped forward, and in that moment, under the lights, surrounded by strangers, the world faded away. It was just a mother and her son, a boy who had become a man, a woman who had held her family together through unimaginable loss, and a bond that had only grown stronger with every challenge life had thrown their way. Terri wrapped her arms around him as the audience watched in silence. Robert held her just as tightly. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because in that embrace, Terri Irwin finally understood the truth she had been avoiding for years. Her son was ready to carry the legacy forward, not as a child of Steve Irwin, but as Robert Irwin, a man with his own path, his own voice, and a heart strong enough to change the world. Long before that emotional night on stage, Robert Irwin had been carrying a weight he rarely allowed the world to see. People often assumed his life was built on excitement and adventure, handling crocodiles, rescuing wildlife, exploring remote jungles, and being the cheerful face of Australia Zoo. And while that part was true, it was only one layer of a far more complex story. Growing up without Steve Irwin wasn't something Robert ever complained about. In fact, he spent most of his childhood trying to be strong for everyone else, especially his mother. But the truth was simple and painful. Robert was too young to remember the last moments with his dad, yet old enough to feel the emptiness that followed. Terri noticed the signs that others missed, the long silences after interviews that mentioned Steve, the way Robert would stare at old photos a little longer than his sister Bindi, the quiet moments at the crocodile exhibit where he would stand alone, as if listening for a voice that would never return. But Robert never said a word. He grew up thinking he had to be the strong one, not just for himself but for the family his father left behind. Years earlier, Terri had once found him sitting in the zoo's wildlife hospital late at night. He was staring at a tiny injured bird they had rescued that morning. When she asked why he wasn't in bed, he simply said, "I don't want anything else to disappear, Mum." It was the closest he had ever come to admitting what he truly felt. She knew then that Robert wasn't just Steve's son, he was a child who had been thrust into grief. Before he even knew what grief meant. As he grew older, the world began to expect more from him. People said he was just like Steve, that he had the same spark, the same fearless charm. And Robert loved hearing that. Who wouldn't? But secretly, he felt pressure that no teenager should carry. He feared letting people down. He feared failing to honor a legacy he barely had time to understand. And most of all, he feared disappointing the one person who had sacrificed everything to raise him, his mother. But Terri never saw him as someone who needed to be his father. She saw him as Robert, kind-hearted, gentle, thoughtful, and uniquely gifted. She protected him fiercely from the weight of comparisons, but in the back of her mind, she always wondered if she had shielded him enough from the expectations he faced. That pressure became even heavier as Robert entered adulthood. Australia Zoo was not just a family home, it was a responsibility. Conservation projects needed leadership. Television networks wanted his presence. Millions of fans expected him to carry Steve's torch. And still, Robert never complained. He kept smiling, kept working, kept showing up every single day. But deep down, something was changing. He was no longer just playing the role of Steve Irwin's son. He was beginning to find his own voice. He had opinions, strong ones, ideas, ambitions that weren't simply reflections of his father's dreams, but were entirely his own. And while Terri supported him with everything she had, she also worried. Change can be frightening, even when it's good. And watching her son step into adulthood meant facing a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. He didn't need her the way he once did. That emotional transformation reached its peak the night he walked on stage. Terri saw it in his posture, in his expression, in the way he carried himself, not as a boy trying to fill a legend's shoes, but as a young man finally stepping out of the shadows. He wasn't replacing Steve. He was becoming Robert, someone the world would remember in his own right. What Terri didn't know was that this transformation had been building for years, and the next chapter of it would shake her heart even more deeply. Long before the world watched Robert Irwin's transformation unfold on stage, he had been planning something that only a few people knew about. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, nor was it done for publicity or camera time. It was something deeply personal, a tribute he had carried in his heart for years, waiting for the right moment, the right stage, and the right words. For most of his life, Robert had watched his mother endure an invisible battle. Terri Irwin had spent nearly 2 decades balancing grief, responsibility, public scrutiny, and motherhood all at once. She had to be strong on the days she wanted to collapse. She had to be brave when the world expected her to smile. And while she never asked for praise or sympathy, Robert saw everything every sleepless night, every tough decision, every moment she put the family above herself. And this tribute was his way of finally speaking the words he could never bring himself to say. The idea began quietly. Robert had been invited to join a major televised performance series, an opportunity millions would dream of. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't a dancer, and he wasn't looking for fame. But then one evening, while sitting on the porch of the Australia Zoo homestead, he watched his mother standing under the fading sunlight, gently feeding the kangaroos they had rescued earlier that week. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally, and something inside him shifted. He realized that he had spent years thanking her with actions, but never with words. And so he accepted the performance invitation, not for himself, but for her. From the moment rehearsals began, he poured everything he had into it. His dance partner quickly understood that this performance meant more to him than the competition. Robert wasn't trying to win a trophy. He was trying to heal a part of his family's story that had gone unspoken for far too long. Behind the scenes, he worked tirelessly, practicing long after everyone else went home. He asked the producers if he could design parts of the performance himself. He selected the music carefully, a soft, emotional piece that echoed the journey of a mother carrying her family through the darkest years. He even incorporated subtle gestures into the choreography inspired by memories of Terri, holding him when he was young. And then came the hardest part. He wrote a short speech to accompany the performance. It took him days to finish. Every sentence felt like it carried years of unspoken emotion. He wanted to honor his father without overshadowing the tribute he owed his mother. He wanted the world to understand that while Steve Irwin had been a legend, Terri Irwin had been the anchor that kept their world standing. Only a few people heard the speech before the performance, and every one of them cried. But Robert still hadn't shown it to Terri. He wanted the full moment, every word, every movement, every emotion to reach her naturally, without preparation. He wanted her to feel it the way he felt it. As the performance day approached, Terri sensed something was different. Robert was quieter, more focused. When she asked if he was nervous, he simply smiled and said, "A little, but it's for a good reason." She had no idea what was coming. She didn't know that the stage lights were set not just for a performance, but for a revelation. She didn't know that the music was chosen to reflect her own life story. She didn't know that Robert had finally found the courage to speak about the pain, love, and strength they had shared since losing Steve. And she didn't know that in just a few minutes, her son would give her a tribute so powerful that the entire world would feel it. She only knew that when he looked at her before stepping onto the stage, his eyes were filled with something she hadn't seen before. The audience settled into a hush as the lights dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated the stage. In that glowing circle stood Robert Irwin, calm, focused, and carrying a kind of emotional gravity no one had ever seen from him before. Terri Irwin sat just a few feet away, unaware that she was moments from experiencing one of the most powerful and personal tributes ever shared on live television. That the soft music began, and Robert took a slow breath before beginning his performance. His movements were deliberate, filled with meaning, every gesture tracing a story only he and his mother fully knew. It wasn't the polished dance of a trained performer. It wasn't supposed to be. It was raw, honest, and vulnerable. It was Robert opening his heart to the world. As the dance unfolded, Terri found herself leaning forward unconsciously. She recognized the symbolism woven into the choreography. Robert representing a child navigating loss, a mother lifting him back to his feet, a family rebuilding itself one day at a time. Each moment felt like a memory brought to life. She saw glimpses of the past she had tucked away for years. Steve's laughter echoing through the zoo, the hospital nights, the fear of raising two children alone, and the strength she forced herself to have even when she felt anything but strong. Then, as the final note faded, the music fell silent. Robert stepped into the center of the stage, microphone in hand. Breathing heavily, not from exhaustion but from emotion, he looked directly at Terri, and the world stopped. "Mom," he began, his voice trembling, "I've spent my whole life watching you hold this family together. You carried me and Bindi through the hardest years without ever asking for anything in return. I never understood how much you sacrificed. Until now. Terri's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes were already filling. You've always told me I didn't need to be dad. He continued gently. You told me to be myself. But what you don't know is that you were the reason I became who I am. The studio was silent. Even the camera crew seemed frozen. You're the strongest person I know. You taught me compassion. You taught me courage. And you taught me that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. I wouldn't be here without you. Terri didn't just cry, she broke. Years of emotion poured out at once. She covered her mouth, shoulders trembling as the audience watched her experience a moment that was too personal to belong on television, yet too beautiful to look away from. Robert stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. Terri rose instinctively, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. When he reached her, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as she clung to him like she had when he was a little boy. In that embrace, something healed. Not entirely, not perfectly, but enough. For the first time, Terri realized she had spent so many years being the anchor that she had forgotten. The anchor could be held to, and Robert, her son who had once fit in the crook of her arm, was now holding her. With a strength she never expected, the audience slowly stood, one by one, offering a standing ovation, not just for a performance, but for a relationship built on resilience, love, and decades of shared grief and triumph. Tears shimmered across the crowd, but none more deeply than the ones falling down Terri Irwin's cheeks. That night wasn't about fame, legacy, or television ratings. It was about a boy becoming a man. It was about a mother finally hearing the gratitude she had carried, the family too long to receive. It was about healing a wound that had been silently aching for 19 years. And as the lights dimmed and Robert guided Terri backstage, one truth became undeniable. Steve Irwin's legacy had never been in danger, because it lived on not just in wildlife, or conservation, or television, but in the heart of a young man who had finally found his own voice, and used it to honor the woman who saved his world.